I heard a discussion recently between a Christian and atheist on the omnipotence of God, and I would like to respond to that and add a few of my own thoughts. The atheist said, asked the Christian, "Is your God omnipotent?" And the Christian answered yes. The atheist replied, "Then in that case, God can do anything. If he's omnipotent, he can do anything he wants. He can create a round circle. He can create a married bachelor. He can create a stone which is too heavy for him to move. He can even give up being God and leave the place of God to somebody else. He can even kill himself because he's omnipotent. If he can't do these things, then he's not omnipotent. And therefore, the Christian God who claims omnipotence doesn't exist." I would answer, no, because omnipotence is not being able to do anything. God can't do anything and everything. God can do things which correspond to his nature, things which are in keeping with his nature. The atheist may answer, well, in that case, omnipotence, as you've just defined it, is a non-definition. Because when you say God can do things which correspond to his nature, what you're basically saying is God can do what God can do. Well, me too. I can do what I can do. Therefore, according to your definition, I am omnipotent. Therefore, according to you, I am God. My answer, no, because omnipotence is not the ability to do anything. It's the ability to do what you want to do. Omnipotence is having the power to do the things that you want to do. You can't do everything you want to do. God can. So you're not God. God can do everything he wants to do. The atheist may answer and say, well, what can you do then? I would say, well, it may be easier to ask what God can't do, or what God doesn't want to do, and therefore what he can't do. Well, the only things that God can't do are the things which would mean that in doing them he would cease being God. He can't do things which, if he did them, would signify that he was no longer God. For example, God can't kill himself, because if he did, he would cease being God, and that is impossible for him. But also, God can't lie, because if he did lie, he would cease being the God of truth, and therefore he would cease being the Christian God. He can't do that, lie, because he doesn't want to do that. And it's true also for his being logical. If God was illogical, or if he was insane, he would cease being the Logos. But he doesn't want to cease being the Logos. Therefore, he cannot be illogical. So, in order to resume my argument simply, God cannot do things which, if he did them, would mean he would cease to be the God he is. And he can't do these things because he doesn't want to do them, because God is logical. So the atheist may reply, well, if that's true, then God is submitted to the fact of being logical. Therefore, logic is a standard to which God must conform himself. Therefore, logic, this standard, is above God. God is held to it. He can't get out of the fact of being logical if what you've just said is true. Therefore, the real God in this universe is not a Christian God, it's logic. I would answer and say no, because when you use the word God, speaking to a Christian, the word God means something. It's not an empty word. When you say God, you're speaking about a being, according to a Christian in the Bible, you're speaking about a being who is holy, just, omnipotent, etc. If we're not talking about that God, then we're not talking about the God of the Bible. The word God, therefore, it includes, when we say God, we include all his attributes. One of his attributes is to be logical, because Jesus is the Logos. Therefore, when you say that God is submitted to logic, that he must be submitted to logic, what you're saying is that a being who thinks logically is submitted to the fact of thinking logically. Or a being who never lies is submitted to the fact of never lying. Or a being who is holy is submitted to the fact of being holy, etc. But have you never heard of the law of identity, the law of logic, which is the law of identity, which says that a thing is what it is. A is A. If A is A cannot be non-A. If he who is the Logos is the Logos, then he cannot be the non-Logos. Therefore, affirming that God is logical is affirming the law of identity. When you say that God is submitted to logic, what you're saying is that A is submitted to A. But there you're making a categorical error, an error of categories. It's not a question of submission, it's a question of identity. It's the law of identity. It's as if I would ask you, are you submitted to the fact of being who you are? It's an absurd question. It's a categorical error. We're not submitted to our identity. Our identity is not a standard which is imposed upon us and which is above us. It's not a question of superiority, but of equality. We are identical to our identity. A is A. And it's the same thing with Jesus. Jesus is the Logos. God, by definition, is logical. His omnipotence means that he can do whatever he wants to. The only things he can't do are the things which mean that he would cease being God if he did them. Therefore, God cannot create a square circle. He can't make a married bachelor, and he can't make a stone which is too heavy for him to move, because if he did that, he would be illogical. And if he was illogical, he would cease being the Logos, and therefore he would cease being God. And God cannot do things which would mean that by doing them, he would cease being who he is. And all that is extremely logical.